You are watching the Ruslan Belov channel. Today we will discuss the situation in Ukraine as of May 19, 2025. A huge number of events occurred today, so let's get started. We received a large number of interesting geolocations, so let's go step by step. We'll begin with the South Donetsk direction. According to pro-Russian sources, over the past 24 hours, Russian units managed to break through the Ukrainian armed forces' defenses in the area of the settlement of Zelenoye Pole and entered the southern outskirts of this village. There are also reports that the armed forces of the Russian Federation managed to enter the southern edge of the settlement of Novopol. This information was provided, so to speak, yesterday evening or early this morning regarding advances on this section of the front. At this time, we have not yet received any geolocations that could confirm the advance of Russian units in this direction. Let me remind you that the Vostok, East group of forces is responsible for offensive operations in this sector. And in fact, this group has many tough battles ahead. The thing is, if we look at the map, then ahead of the Vostok group, moving in the northwestern direction, lies a massive number of tiny one-street villages. There are practically no large settlements. In effect, the combat actions over the next 4 to 5 months in this sector of the front will strongly resemble the fighting that took place west of Selidovo, when Russian forces advanced through settlements such as Ukrainka, Yasnevaya, Srebnaya, Zaporozhye, Preobrazhenka, Troitskaya, and Kotlyarovka. So we're talking about numerous battles, very difficult maneuvering, and constant exposure in open terrain. If we look further, the nearest settlement from the Russian army's forward positions in the northwest direction is Pokrovskaya. It's located 32 kilometers away. This is a more or less serious settlement, which, if captured, the Russian army could use as a base for further advances westward, towards Zaporozhye, Dnipro, and the settlement of Gulyai Pole. Speaking of Gulyai Pole, the Russian army has already approached this settlement closely from the south. In the northeast direction, from the villages of Zelenoye Pole and Novopol, it's at least 28 kilometers away. That means there is still a long road of routine and grueling work ahead for Russian units. Next, we move on to the Bogatii direction of the front. We call it that because in recent days, the Russian Ministry of Defense and independent cartographers confirmed full control over this area of the front. There is no doubt, Bogatii is now firmly under Russian control. At present, the Russian army is gradually trying to flank the village of Otradnoye. The Ukrainian armed forces are still resisting in this area, but so far the Russian side has not attempted a direct assault. They are trying to encircle the village. As soon as Ukrainian units in Otradnoye realize that the village is about to be partially encircled, they will likely receive an order to retreat or may withdraw on their own. In any case, the situation around Otradnoye will most likely be resolved soon. Within a few days, the fighting over this small village will probably come to an end. Now we move to the Dnieper front. Here, the Russian army continues expanding its control zone along the regional boundary, opposite the settlement of Novopavlovka. Today, key developments occurred on both the southern and northern flanks. Some neutral cartographers today noted the advance of Russian units from the direction of Bogdanovka toward the southwest. There is constant movement across the fields toward the northwest and western outskirts of Alexeyevka. The Russian side is trying to avoid having to storm Alexeyevka directly from Andreevka or Bogatii. We can see that the Russians are doing everything they can to bypass the settlement, minimize casualties among troops, and create a situation where the Ukrainian army will be forced to leave the village. However, regarding Alexeyevka, we see a huge number of fortified positions in the area, and it seems that avoiding a major battle for Alexeyevka will not be possible. On the northern flank, the Russian army is also gradually advancing toward the regional border. There's been another map update. According to some pro-Russian and neutral cartographers, the Russian armed forces captured a strongpoint located between the settlements of Moravka and Novaya Nikolaevka in the past 24 hours. This information was confirmed by neutral sources. Apparently, in the near future, fighting may begin for the farm territories between Novonikolaevka and Moravka. But speaking of these farms, let me remind you that just a week ago, we discussed video footage from this area. The Ukrainian side had already withdrawn from these farms. For example, on May 13th, footage was published showing Ukrainian troops from the 59th Brigade retreating from this sector and blowing up all the barracks behind them, preventing Russian forces from using them to amass troops. So here, the Ukrainian side has essentially abandoned this part of the front. Now the question for the Russian army is how to accumulate enough manpower here to move forward. Toward Novopavlovka, possibly toward flanking Udaknoye from the southwest, and toward Novopodgorodnoye. Next, we move on to the Pokrovsk front. For several days in a row, there has been complete silence in this sector. It's hard to say, maybe a regrouping is underway, or perhaps high-intensity fighting is happening, but we're receiving almost no information. And probably the most important and interesting footage from the Pokrovsk direction, or rather related to it, comes from the T0514 highway. Let's take a look at this video. Here we can see a Ukrainian vehicle traveling along the road, and we can observe destroyed equipment in the area. If we zoom out and look at updates from the deeper rear areas of the Ukrainian armed forces over the past week, we see a huge number of geolocations. Looking at the supply route, more precisely the Pokrovsk-Dobropoliye map, the road from Dobropoliye goes toward Andreyevka, then toward Sergeyevka, and from Sergeyevka it leads to Kramatorsk. This is a critical supply artery for maintaining the combat capability of Ukrainian forces in this sector. And we can see that, while it's too early to say the roads are under tight Russian control, one thing is clear. Russian drones are already flying here in large numbers. Because the Ukrainian side was not expecting this many drones in the area, they haven't even begun taking basic safety measures. That's why, over the past few weeks, Russian units have managed to destroy a considerable amount of Ukrainian military equipment and supply vehicles. Right now we see only a few map icons, but it's important to understand that the T514 highway and its tunnel are going to be critical. Control over this route, especially using drones, could very well become the key to breaching and dismantling Ukrainian defenses along the Pokrovsk-Kostiantynivka arc. The Ukrainians are publishing extremely important footage, and it's hard to predict how they plan to counter this growing threat. Next, we turn to the H32 Highway, which has become the focal point for the majority of geolocated activity in the past 24 hours. Most of these updates are marked with Russian flags, indicating ongoing Russian advances. If we summarize what has happened in the last 24 hours, according to neutral, pro-Ukrainian and pro-Russian analysts and mappers, it appears that the Ukrainian defense line along the H32 has been broken. The front has effectively collapsed in this sector. The so-called flower pattern of Russian gains is spreading, and it's unclear where Ukraine plans to stabilize the situation. Let's break this down step by step, starting with the latest report from the Russian Ministry of Defense. According to their briefing, Russian forces have fully cleared the settlement of Novoalenivka. Based on this report, we're updating the map. The stretch along the H32 highway from Novopoltavka to the northern outskirts of Novoalenivka is now marked under Russian control. This is a substantial change. For comparison, here's how the map looked as of May 18th, and here's how it looked on May 19th. Clearly a significant shift. Multiple cartographers have confirmed this advancement. Now let's turn to Novopoltavka. Recently, footage emerged showing a Russian assault on the village from multiple directions. In the final scenes, we see Russian troops raising their flag on a building in the western part of the settlement. The building has been geolocated, confirming that Russian forces reached the western outskirts. This suggests that most of the village is now under Russian control. Even neutral and some pro-Ukrainian mappers have updated their maps, seemingly acknowledging that Novopoltavka has likely fallen under firm Russian control. It's a significant shift. Meanwhile, pro-Russian sources show an even grimmer picture for Ukrainian forces. According to their updates, the front has not just shifted, it has collapsed. Russian forces have reportedly taken full control of all defensive positions, tree lines, and strongholds within this red-zoned area. In other words, this entire territory is now under Russian control. The Russian side, based on the incoming reports, is not stopping here. Fighting continues, and Russian troops are advancing both toward Kostiantynivka from the southwest and toward Popov Yar, Poltavka and Rusin Yar. These are serious developments, and the situation for Ukrainian units is deteriorating rapidly. I did not expect the situation to escalate so sharply from this sector. From these new positions, we may soon see a push toward Yablunivka from the west, aimed at cutting the Ukrainian supply route along the H32 Highway and completing the encirclement of Ukrainian forces in what is now essentially the Kleban Beek pocket. Why do we say this pocket is essentially formed? Because today, multiple sources, including some pro-Ukrainian ones, confirmed that Russian forces have not only entered the village of Romanivka, but have taken full control of it as of May 19, 2025. This suggests that Ukrainian units remaining in the southern part of the Kleban Beek salient are now surrounded. It may still be an operational encirclement for now, but the overall configuration on the map points to a fully formed cauldron. At this point, the distance between Russian forward positions west of Zoria and near Romanivka has shrunk to under 3.5 kilometers. That's within range for small arms fire, not to mention artillery and the hundreds of FPV drones saturating this part of the front. In short, the southern pocket is now fully encircled, and it appears Russian forces are also working to create a second pocket, from Zoria to Yablunivka, by advancing from Novoalenivka along the water reservoirs toward the Kleban Beek Dam. We should also expect further Russian advances from Novopoltavka northwest toward key settlements like Popov Yar, Poltavka, and Rusin Yar. These villages, with their surrounding defensive structures, are critical. Controlling them would give Russian troops a strong foothold for a future pincer movement, potentially encircling both Kostiantynivka and Pokrovsk. Losing this section of the front could spell disaster for Ukrainian forces. Let me remind you, in the Sumy offensive and the Surzansky counteroffensive, Russian FPV drones have already demonstrated operational ranges of 20 kilometers. This is no longer theoretical. There may not be large numbers of these long-range drones just yet, but footage from the T-514 route clearly shows they are in action and in growing numbers. We'll keep watching developments closely. If you ask me, we've talked about this front segment before. It now looks like the beginning of the major battle of 2025. Given how difficult it is for Ukrainian forces to establish a stable defensive line here, it's likely one of the reasons why Western partners are urging Putin to agree to at least a 30-day ceasefire, which would give Ukraine some breathing room. Let's now shift to the Civki Donets Donbas Canal. Cartographers have updated the maps here as well, showing continued Russian movement through the fields near Chasiv Yar. There's ongoing fighting for strongholds and the town center, but no major changes yet. In the northern part of the front, Russian forces have once again become active. Their offensives come in waves, and it seems we're on the cusp of another surge. We're seeing a large number of airstrikes, artillery barrages, and the use of heavy flamethrower systems like the TOS-1A Soln-Sepiok. Expect high activity and offensive operations from Russian forces here in the next 48 to 72 hours. On the Lyman axis, the situation is stable. Artillery continues to target the town of Zarekne. Russian troops appear to be shaping the battlefield for a future offensive. In the Sivas-Kupiansk direction, no major changes for now. However, we're receiving interesting reports from the Sumy sector. According to the Russian Ministry of Defense, the settlement of Marina was fully cleared by the Seva group. Based on this, we've updated the map to show Russian control over the area between Demidovka, on the Russian side, and Marina, in Sumy region. Several days ago, cartographers had already marked this as a grey zone. Now, with more reliable sources confirming the advance, it's been reclassified. Fighting also continues near the settlement of Tetkino. Recently released footage shows a Ukrainian counterattack involving multiple vehicles, but they failed to even cross the border. Most of their equipment was destroyed near the state line. Slightly further south, more footage shows Ukrainian FPV drones from the 225th Assault Battalion targeting concentrations of Russian equipment. It's important to note that during the height of the Ukrainian push over the May holidays, some of these areas were marked in grey, as Ukrainian forces briefly reached as far as Belopoyskaya Street in Tetkino. But today's new footage indicates they've since pulled back, and Russian troops have re-established full control over the border, at least in this section. That's all for today, dear friends. Thank you for watching. Don't forget to subscribe to the channel, leave your likes, and take care.